past and a pessimistic notion of as long as the evil American empire and Israel are involved, there will be no peace.
Let's go to the next
I congratulate Mr. Dershowitz again for one true statement. They are not Jewish roads, they're Israeli roads. That is, they are roads of the sovereign, what I'm quoting the High Court, the sovereign state of the Jewish people in Israel and the diaspora.
Oh, that's
correct.
That's like saying that British roads are roads of the sovereign Anglican people.
Fine.
I mean, Britain is an Anglican country as well.
We can have
I agree to your qualification. There are Israeli roads, there are Israeli highways and Palestinian paths. If you want a creative solution, I mentioned one.
Let's go to the
I mentioned it. The Geneva Accords, the Taba agreements, which Israel canceled. Yes,
I accept the Taba agreements, and I think that many in Israel do as well.
You should explain to Mr. Peres why he objected.
We're going to focus on this next question.
Hello?
You are.
Yes. Hi. My name is Abraham Reisman. I'm a sophomore at college. There's really a question for both of you, but I guess I'll ask Professor Chomsky just because Professor Dershowitz just spoke. It's sort of funny that we're all here, given that a lot of us have never been to Israel, never been to Palestine, and it's long been one of the sort of strange paradoxes in world politics that Americans and people the world over can get so enraged about either side when it's a conflict that many of us will never firsthand experience. Specifically, how would both of you like to see young people like me and a lot of us here envisioning the conflict in the future? Because a lot of us have a tendency to internalize it to a degree where it's not about people anymore, on both sides. There are people I know who are ardent Zionists who never go to Israel, who believe in it because they're very religiously Jewish, and all of a sudden it becomes detached from the realities on the ground. And there are people who are very pro-Palestinian who are strongly in favor of social justice and economic justice.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, how do you...
Professor Chomsky.
Well, my feeling is you should approach it as an American. And as for an American, it is one of the lead issues in the world. Israel is able to do these things, to dismantle and destroy the West Bank, to disintegrate the community, because the United States gives it massive aid, unparalleled in international affairs, not only military and economic, but also diplomatic, by, as I've mentioned, for the last 30 years, unilaterally blocking the two-state settlement, which Israel also totally rejected, alone, the two of them. And as long as you, the American taxpayer, goes on supporting this, yes, it'll continue. And it'll lead to exactly what the Bantustan-style solution that Benvenisti and others described, right on the ground. And yes, so therefore it's of enormous importance to Americans. As for a solution, it's pretty straightforward. They were coming close to a solution at Taba until Israel called it off. Negotiations continued, leading to several proposals, of which the most detailed were the Geneva Accords. You can find out what I thought about all of those in print. You can ask Mr. Dershowitz where he supported them in print. The Geneva Accords in December 2002 were accepted by essentially the whole world. Israel rejected them. The U.S. refused even to send a message to the Geneva meetings. But they're still potentially alive, and American citizens can compel our own government to reverse its program, to accept the international consensus for the first time, and then we'll be on the way to a solution.
Thank you.
Well,
Briefly, Professor Dershowitz.
I, too, have written about the Geneva Accords in Chapter 6 of my book, and I generally support many elements of the Geneva Accords. I do not support the right of return. That is, the idea that 700,000 or now 4 million Palestinians can demographically destroy Israel.
Which is rejected in the Geneva Accords.
It is not rejected in the Geneva Accords. It is not accepted or rejected. It is left for future negotiation.
Exactly. And it is left open because
it's easy how you change your view. First it's accepted, then it's left open. What's your next position?
Let's be precise. They did not say anything about that because the Palestinians had already at Camp David and at Taba accepted the so-called pragmatic settlement, which would not affect the demographic character
That
of Israel.
is
If you want to learn about that,
simply
read
false.
the serious scholarship like Ronan
That is
Pundak,
simply
head of the Shimon
false.
Peres piece.
I can tell you that President Clinton told me directly and personally that what caused the failure of the Camp David-Taba Accords was the refusal of the Palestinians and Arafat to give up the right of return. That was the sticking point. It wasn't Jerusalem. It wasn't borders. It was the right of return.
Can
Now,
we-
if you believe that the United States has unilaterally rejected the two-state solution, that's what we heard from Professor Chomsky, that it's the United States that has rejected the two-state solution, when every modern American president has favored the two-step solution, I say, welcome to Planet Chomsky.
Now,
That's
now
just
we
you
can
not
hold there.
true.
here's a simple exercise. You can believe one of two things: the extensive published diplomatic record, which I gave you a sample of, and you can find in detail in books of mine and others, or what Mr. Dershowitz says he heard from somebody.
No,
which you can't check.
and check
Okay.
the diplomatic record,
Professor Dershowitz,
check the maps,
sir, your question.
and read Dennis Ross's book, which contains appendices which have the
Okay.
diplomatic record. What Chomsky is telling you to do
right.
is read the available record in Esperanto. He constantly tells you to read sources he knows you can't read because he knows the record in Esperanto. He constantly tells you to read sources he knows you can't read because he knows if you check his sources, they are false. They
Okay,
are
let's go to the
simply
next question.
Capable of
false.
reading-
He
Sir,
makes
how
it
many of
up
you are
as he
capable of
goes
reading
along.
English?
That's the reality.
Okay, thank
How
you.
many of you are capable of reading English?
And if he says
including-
you don't find it in the press, his answer is, it's not in the press. It's part of a conspiracy to
Let's go.
keep it out of the press.
Thanks very
He
much.
can't
It's in
lose.
You guys
It's in the
hold for a
documentary
sec.
record.
Okay.
It's in the documentary record, which happens to be quite different
You
from
can
the press
say that.
version.
Okay.
Not
You
only
can
on this
say it,
issue.
but you know, you can
All right.
cry wolf so
It's
many
important,
times.
gentlemen, I think it's important that we take advantage of your expertise, your many years of wisdom by hearing a couple more questions. Please, you are.
Hi, my name is Tal Silberstein, and I was campaign manager and later on special advisor to Prime Minister Barak in Camp David. So I think I know at least no less than Ron Pundak, my friend, about what happened in Camp David in Taba. I'm saying it only because I think that what Mr. Professor Chomsky said here, a lot of things are inaccurate, even though,
Do you have a question?
yes.
Please
even though,
give it.
I think just before the question, because it's very important.
Please go directly to your question.
The,
You know, there was a question before that had about a 7-minute prerequisite. This is an expert who was there, who was an eyewitness. I think he should be permitted to precede his question with a 1-minute point.
I don't want to go into history, and I'm a little excited because you have to understand one thing. I believe we have only one last opportunity to reach peace, and this is this coming party and this coming election. Now, my question to you, Professor Chomsky, and I agree with you, Israel has done a lot of crazy and terrible things to Palestinians, and Palestinians have done a lot of crazy and terrible things to Israelis. But let's say that the new party, after the election, guided by Sharon, is to offer the Palestinians a deal. It doesn't matter which deal, a deal that will be accepted by most Palestinians. Would you support this deal even if it doesn't reflect your views or your ideological views?
Well, I'm glad to see that I assume you endorse Ron Pundak's expert knowledge, correct? I therefore recommend to all of you who read English that you read the summary of his review of all of this in the Journal of the Institute of Strategic and Security Studies in England. And for those of you who read Hebrew, like you, I presume, you read the much longer study that Ron Pundak and Shaul Arieli wrote. It's on the Paris Center website, which describes in detail, if you like, I can quote it from you, as to what I would
Ron Pundak
accept.
was not in Camp David, by the way.
Pardon?
Ron Pundak was not in Camp David.
He was one of the negotiators in the background.
not.
He was one of the negotiators in the background, and he was
He was
from
not.
he was from Oslo, And his study...
He's from Oslo. He was not even close to Camp David, just for the record.
He was one of the advisors, as you know.
Chomsky
and his study
so.
in 2000... Read his, you're the one who told me you agree with him. If you think not, tell the Shimon Peres Center to fire him as director. Those are the basic Israeli documents. Furthermore, they're supported by plenty of others. If you want to know more about Taba, you can read the European Union report accepted by both sides, which says exactly what I said. As to your question, yes, I already told you the answer. There is a very good solution on the table. It's the solution that they came close to in Taba before Israel canceled it, and that was then carried forward by high-level Israeli and Palestinian negotiators informally, leading to the Geneva... That's what I'm telling you. It's leading to the December 2002 Geneva Accords, which are right there. You can read them in English. You can read them in Hebrew. They're on the web, no problem. Look up the Gush Shalom website. That's a pretty good solution. It's not perfect.
I didn't get an answer, sorry.
That's the answer to your question.
No, the answer was, even if it wasn't your plan, and
Pardon?
most Palestinians...
Pardon?
Even if it wasn't the plan that you think is optimal, or I.
What are you
most
asking?
Palestinians, because I know most Israelis probably would vote for it. If most Palestinians would vote for it, even if it's not optimal, and it's not going to be optimal, let me tell you. If most Palestinians would vote for it, would you accept it as a people?
It's not up to me to accept. You asked what I thought. Okay. What I think is there's a very simple, creative solution which happens to be very close to the international consensus that I've been supporting for over 30 years, and that the United States and Israel have been unilaterally blocking. It was reached by high-level Israeli and Palestinian negotiators, and though there hasn't been a vote about it, my guess is that if there was a poll on both sides, majority on both sides would probably accept it. But that's totally different from the proposals of the Sharon Peres party, the Kadima, or, incidentally, of Peretz's Labor Party so far. So far, he simply endorsed the expansionist program that breaks up the West Bank into cantons.
Perfect selective use of Shimon Peres, the Shimon Peres Peace Center. I want to read you a quote from Noam Chomsky. He described Shimon Peres, he described Ronald Reagan at one point as the semi-divine Reagan, as one of the iconic group of mass murderers from Hitler to Idi Amin to Peres. So on the one day of the week, you find Noam Chomsky describing Peres, this great man of peace, as an iconic mass murderer. And on another day, he's quoting the authority of Shimon Peres to make peace. I mean, where do you stand on Shimon Peres? Is he a man of peace, or is he an iconic mass murderer?
He is an iconic mass murderer, and I've given plenty of evidence for it. And he is not a man of peace. What I did not refer to Shimon Peres. I referred to the director of the Shimon Peres Peace Center. That's not Shimon Peres.
But you stick to the argument that Shimon Peres, the man who just joined in to make peace, is an iconic mass murderer and not a man of peace. I think that says it all.
Okay. You want me to run through his record? And including the fact that as late as 1996, he informed the press that a Palestinian state will never happen. And in 1997, he said, maybe we can ultimately tolerate it somewhere, but we're not saying where. That's not a man of peace.
Yes, thank you. You are.
My name is Amy Levin. I'm a first year at the Kennedy School. My question is for Professor Dershowitz. You had said that one of the steps in your plan for peace in the future was for the Palestinians to stop their terrorism activities. Right. So my question would be, if you were advising the Israeli government, is there anything about their current strategy and how they respond to these terrorism tactics that you would advise them to change to move forward?
Yes, I would. I do not favor, for example, house destructions. On the other hand, I do think that targeted killings of ticking bomb terrorist leaders and terrorists has been quite effective. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of terrorist acts have been prevented, including an attempt to blow up a gas tank outside of Tel Aviv, including an attempt to blow up a port in Ashdod. Tens of thousands of Israelis probably would have been killed but for the intelligence activities and the preventive activities of the Israeli government. I have a book coming out in January called Preemption, where I set out all the parameters of where I think preemptive acts are justified, where I think they're not justified. I think Israel gets a C+ or a B- in its compliance with human rights, in fighting terrorism.